Our next speaker is the head and co-founder of the organization Nossas in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Alessandra Orofino works with citizen participation in one of the world's largest cities, where the levels of inequality are staggering and electoral participation is at an all-time low. Cities could be ideal places for human happiness to flourish, says Orofino. But somehow we seem to be unable to make our cities work properly. So how do we start making cities that make us engage, that make us care? You may wonder why the stage is empty. Well, Alessandra Orofino is not here. She is still in Rio de Janeiro, but she is with us by live video link. Please welcome Alessandra Orofino.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here, well, in some way, be with you today. Thank you for welcoming me. I am trusting that all is working on the technical side, and I'm going to jump right to it. I apologize. It's very early in Brazil, so if I blank or forget about something, you know my excuse. It's now almost 7, but I've been up since very early this morning in order to join you all the way in Norway. I was asked to talk about power and participation in cities. And I can't really begin now without actually talking about power in general and how democracies are changing and in some ways being captured in this sort of era that we're living in. When I first started working with citizen participation at the city level, it was 2011, so almost 10 years ago. And the situation, especially where I come from, especially here in Brazil, was very, very different. There was a lot of disenchantment. A lot of people felt disengaged and completely pushed away from politics and political life in general. Now, that has in many ways changed, but not in the way that we expected. There has been a movement of people that are re-engaging in politics, but in many ways they're doing that through the leadership of what we're calling platform strongmen, who are essentially people who combine 2 ways to exercise power. On the one hand, they can be very authoritarian and present themselves as the only men strong enough to take threats away, to make people feel safe again. And on the other hand, they thrive on the movements of people and the mobilization of people and the participatory energy of crowds in a way that we hadn't really seen before in our democratic lives. And here in Brazil, of course, the sort of main icon of that tendency, of that trend, is our president, Jair Bolsonaro, who's a far-right politician who ran on a far-right, very authoritarian platform, but also ran on the back of a genuine grassroots movement of people. And that combination is extremely hard to understand and to work with. It is my view that we really need to beat these platform strongmen at their game. We need to know how to use crowd-based strategies, engagement-led strategies, but ethically and for good, and in order to promote democratic values. And that's what I've been attempting to do since sort of the political tide shifted here in Brazil in my work as an activist and as a community organizer. I also think that in order to get there, we need to focus not just on democratic governments, but first and foremost on democratic societies. We really have a problem when it comes to instilling and promoting democratic values at the society level. And I couldn't stress this enough. This is not a problem of political representation. This is not a problem of leadership alone. It is not that somehow we ended up with leaders that do not espouse democratic values. We ended up with these leaders because we voted them in. And because we voted them in, the problem really lies at the society level. And that's what we need to get back. That's what we need to win back, at least in my corner of the woods here in Brazil. How are we doing this, and how do we think that this could be done? really we see two paths. One path we call resistance, and the other one we call regeneration. And resistance, of course, is easy to understand. And it's probably the first word that comes to mind when you see far-right authoritarian politicians gaining a lot of power. How do we exert force in opposition? How do you resist? How do you organize society in a way that doesn't allow it to be completely transformed by the public policies that are implemented as a result of these movements? Regeneration, on the other hand, is a lot harder to accomplish because it means working to change radically and for the better the tissue of society itself, to generate anew, to become formed again. In many ways, what our democracies need, and I'll get to how I think cities are the ideal places to do that in a minute, but what our democracies need is a full-blown regeneration in order to avoid the sort of political capture of anti-democratic forces through democratic means. In the way that we organize our work here at Nossas and in Brazil, we see the path to resistance as being activism and the path to regeneration as being solidarity. I'll give you specific examples of how we do this at the city level. And in order to do so, I'll tell you a little bit about our work and how we organize ourselves. We are a laboratory for activism, and we are also a network of city-based civic engagement projects or infrastructures. We're now present all over the country, in all 27 states. Brazil is a continental country. We have almost 5,000 municipalities in the country. So as a network, we're present in all states, and we have 30 cities that are now part of that network spread out across the states. And they work with citizens at the city level on a number of fronts, but essentially we create technologies, solidarity networks, and mobilization opportunities for people who want to have an impact on their communities. We give people who are desperate for a chance to change their communities, to improve their neighborhoods, to improve their cities, a clear path as to how to do that, how to influence policy, how to have that impact. And it's not always easy to figure out as a citizen what that path looks like. So that's what we do. That's what our teams across these different cities do every day. We were born out of Rio, which was our pilot project in Rio, which, as was mentioned in my introduction, is one of the world's largest megacities. It's also one of the most unequal megacities in the world. We launched our project there. Rio means My Rio in Portuguese, at the end of 2011. And since then, we expanded I'm going to have to go back one slide. We expanded in 2015 to become this network of cities. In 2017, we started launching different projects that weren't necessarily city-based, but worked at a multi-city level, and so on and so forth. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of our previous work for you to get a better sense of what we mean by engaging people at the city level. One of our most famous campaigns that we ran at the city of Rio was this campaign called Escola Não Se Destrói, You Cannot Destroy My School. And I went back one slide again, I'm sorry. Thank you. When we blocked the demolition of one of the state's best public schools. And we have a little video here to show you, but being conscious of time, I think I'm just going to go through the presentation. If I have time, I'll show it to you at the end. It's pretty interesting. But this was one of the best public schools in Rio, and it was located right next to this big stadium, which you can see here in the picture, called the Maracanã Stadium. And it was marked for demolition in the lead up to the World Cup. And we worked with students and teachers and the entire school community to keep it from being demolished. The original plan was to demolish it, to turn it into a parking lot, I kid you not. The school was, of course, against it, the school community, and we worked with them diligently over months to the point where we installed a webcam in a building next to the school and monitored it 24/7. And then citizens from across the city could sign up to watch that webcam. And when they saw a bulldozer coming, and they did come, they pressed a button, and everyone else who had signed up would get an SMS message and actually go to the school to physically protect it. So that happened a couple times. And after that happened a couple of times, the government, of course, decided not to demolish it anymore because it didn't really look good on the newspapers to have a bunch of kids physically protecting their school and other citizens that were standing in solidarity with these kids. Now we organize our projects in these two fronts, activism and solidarity, and here's just a little sense for you of the scope of the work. I won't get into too much detail for each project. Of course, the question is this kind of work, activism-based, solidarity-based, effective against this platform strongman, especially at the city level? And in order for me to answer that question, I want to introduce you to Brazil's first platform strongman, who is not Jair Bolsonaro. He may be the most famous one now because he's pretty much destroying the planet, but he's not the first. The first one is this guy, João Doria. João Doria was elected mayor of São Paulo, another city where we work through our activism network. And he was, prior to becoming mayor, the host of The Apprentice Brazil. I hope that rings some bells for you. He was a sort of television personality who made his name by firing people on live TV. And then he became mayor of the biggest city in Brazil, one of the biggest in the world, one of the biggest in the region. He had this very social media-driven strategy as to how he wanted to proceed with his work as mayor. Was very present on Facebook and was known for wearing these crazy costumes all the time. So every time there was a problem in the city, he would wear the costume, I don't know, of the sort of the fireman or the garbage man or whatever was relevant to the problem, and then appear in these sort of crazy appearances wearing these costumes. It was very strange, but he was very powerful. And here's a few more pictures for you to get a taste of the type of a personality we're talking about. And before he was elected mayor, we already had Minha Sampa, which means my São Paulo in Portuguese, up and running in the city of São Paulo. And we had ran a pretty large campaign prior to his election to open up the city's biggest avenue for pedestrians. São Paulo is a city that is known for being very car-centric and not at all green. There's not that many green spaces in the city, and it's a common complaint by the city's population. So our campaign was to turn this enormous avenue into a boulevard, into a pedestrian way on the weekends. And that was met with a lot of resistance from some names in the car industry. Some people in an affluent area close to that avenue were also not very happy because they thought the policy would bring poor people from the outskirts of the city into the center of the city. But at the end of the day, we actually won, and the policy was implemented. And it was very popular. People loved Paulista Aberta, Open Paulista, and came on weekends in masses, multitudes came. When João Doria was elected, he ran on a platform of destroying everything his predecessor had done. He said that his predecessor was corrupt and everything that he had done needed to be undone. He also ran on a car-centric platform. His motto was Accelerate São Paulo, and one of his main campaign promises was to eliminate the speed limits in some of the São Paulo streets that his predecessor had implemented on the name of accelerating city life. So we were pretty sure that a policy that essentially centered around closing streets up for pedestrians so they could use the streets instead of cars using them was going to be on his hit list of policies to undo, which is why we ran a preemptive campaign before he became mayor, and after his election, before he actually took office. And we asked him not to undo the policy. I'm sorry, I'm going to the next slide. I don't think that. Oh, yeah, there you go. And this is where it becomes interesting. He answered, right? We ran a pressure campaign. We had thousands of people emailing him through a little technology that we developed that allows you to email decision makers very easily. And the emails go from the citizens' email address to the elected officials. And he answered each of these emails saying that this is his email right here, João Doria at, and his very short but on the point message. He says that Paulista Aberta will keep being open because it's working well, and it was something that the population did. And that was crucial. We had a meeting with him afterwards, and that's exactly what he said. This is not a policy set by my predecessor. This is something that the population won. This is an important aspect of this. Policies that are branded as being something that one elected official developed tend to be very fragile when democracies are captured by strongmen. Because at the core of a strongman's agenda, there's often this sense of a need to destroy something that was done before. So when you have the population drive the process of implementing new policy, actively participating in politics, actively pushing for things to be done, you protect these policies from the vices related to sort of this change in political life and in political cycles. João Doria, the story is not finished yet, then became governor of São Paulo. Clearly, his platform was proving itself to be popular. He now has aspirations to become president, so let's see how that goes. But now he's governor of São Paulo, and after he became governor, we also ran a pressure campaign on him. And this time, the community that pressured him was a community that was involved in another project of ours called Mapa do Acolhimento. Mapa do Acolhimento is a platform that matches women that have suffered sexual or domestic violence with volunteers, both psychologists and lawyers, who provide them with pro bono services. And that project is present all over Brazil, and we have thousands of women that receive therapy every week through the platform. When João Doria became governor, he vetoed a project to open up 24-hour police stations for women in the state of São Paulo. And that was something that the feminist movement had long advocated for, that some police stations be staffed by women staff and open 24 hours so they could be a welcoming place where women could come forward with cases of violence. And he vetoed that project. And we actually mobilized the community of volunteers, both psychologists and lawyers, who worked on this issue through Mapa do Acolhimento to pressure him. And the interesting thing was that community had it didn't have a political vein that was very clear. These were women that were committed to the cause, but they weren't related to anyone in sort of the electoral politics landscape. And that became clear to João Doria when we launched the pressure campaign. So he ended up, this is what the campaign looked like. He ended up going back on his veto and actually opening now 50 of these police stations all over the state of São Paulo. So that's just to give you a sense of how solidarity and activism can work at the city level, even when you have these sort of democratic captures, even in these challenging times. And through that work, we have now mobilized over 1.3 million people. We have trained hundreds of activists, raised quite a lot of money through crowdfunding, and have created these 13 hubs that then direct the work of 30 other cities all over the country. I will finish this just by saying that we are playing the long game. We know that times are challenging, especially where we come from, but we really think that a new generation is rising, and that generation is more connected, more open and tolerant than the generations that came before. We at Nossas want to be their first schools of democracy. We want to be able to resist and reinvent and persevere, because we know that governments will come and go, but citizens remain. They are the ones who are the true guardians of our cities, the true guardians of our policies, and the true guardians of our democracies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. I'm sure that we can find your film online, is that right?
Yes, you can.
Excellent, and thank you so much. And from this very different situation in Norway, I'm sure I speak for everybody when I can say that what you have been doing in Brazil is fantastically inspiring, not least the scale of the engagement. This goes really beyond activism to a true political force, which is very inspiring to see. Thank you so much.
Thank you.